I'm also wondering, like, since you are a woman of color, specifically, like, I would say, of a Muslim religion, because I feel like that is one representation, like, that's when intersectionality comes into play. And I strongly abide by that theory, is because when we talk about women of color, we tend to focus on people of a certain religion also among those women of color. And I
Mhm.
think it is the Muslim women who often get left out in those representations, which is why I'm wondering, like, being that woman of color from a certain religious community, what is what does it mean being in a certain leadership position?
Mm, that's an interesting question. What I'll say to this is we've been having a lot of conversations so far in this chat about like, building credibility through external sources, obviously knowing your worth internally too. But I had an interesting conversation the other day with somebody who, comes from the same ethnic background. So they're also Pakistani. And they were saying, Meena, like, I don't have anything to speak to. Like, I don't have some kind of title. I don't have some kind of experience like that. And, I have a lot of conversations like this with people, especially young people. And whenever I have those conversations, I'm always reminded that the reason that if you have the capacity or the access to opportunity to enter spaces where people like you haven't been into before,
Yeah.
it's a responsibility that you're taking on because you want to ensure people who come after you, who come from your communities, don't have to overwork themselves nearly to the same extent. Like it's not that I'm saying you enter this space as like, if I'm giving an example, like for instance, if you enter a space and you're like a top-notch A+ student to prove yourself, like if you're a brown student, you're holding yourself to that standard.
Yeah.
But if there's another student who, let's say, is white and they're not performing at the same level, but they get hired for a job through connections or through whatever relatability, they discuss rugby or sailing or something with their interviewer who also went to a similar school that had, a sailing team or some kind of very fancy,
Yeah.
money requiring sport. Um, you want to ensure that people like you don't have to do that whole gymnastics. Like you want to make sure that it's okay to just live and just be accepted for who you are. I don't believe in this idea that every single person has to be above and beyond exceptional in order to deserve respect. One of the biggest challenges as a Muslim woman, especially, is, you know, I like to think about the idea of who's considered a perfect victim. I think about this all the time. Whenever I'm in like any kind of leadership position or not, whether it's formal leadership or not, I think about this all the time. If you recall the London attack that happened, terrorist attack, where I won't go into the details of it, but if you remember that happening, um, I'm not sure if you noticed, but oftentimes when people of a marginalized community or an underrepresented community in Canada are, targeted in hate crimes like this, when we're doing their vigils, when we're, speaking about their lives, we really emphasize just how educated they were, just how kind they were. And I think first, out of no disrespect to that family whatsoever, may, God really, put them in the highest of heavens. I truly hope so. But the thing is, we always emphasize, they were so educated, they were so amazing. And the thing is, it's this idea of a perfect victim. We really want people to see that, look, these Muslims, like, they weren't here to take your money, they weren't here to, steal your jobs. We really try to play that defensive card. And the challenge is, what do we do when, for instance, in Ottawa, a Black man with schizophrenia was, killed by the police and there was no justice for him or his family? What do we do in situations like that? Because that's not a perfect victim in the eyes of the general Canadian public. And I really think we have to redefine this idea of deserving respect just because we're excellent. I don't want, women who come after me who wear the hijab. I don't want any women of color. I don't want anyone, to be honest, to have to come after me, but especially women who are Muslim and wear the hijab and are, proudly Muslim, to have to come after me in any spaces that I've been through and have to constantly be proving that they deserve to be there, to have to constantly be proving that they deserve the respect. Like, for instance, if anything ever happened to me, I can already imagine that, my eulogy would be reading out all my list of these accomplishments instead of just what if I was just a student who was just living, like having, good times with my friends, just going to my classes.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's something we should really be thinking about, that who is considered a perfect victim. We should not be putting this burden on, every racialized person, on every Muslim person that comes through to prove that they're exceptional. People deserve respect for, being people. And that's something that we have to be really cognizant of, or at least I'm really cognizant of in any of the leadership positions that I formally take on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, definitely. And I think what you just mentioned itself is like a racialized concept. And the reason I say that is because even when we talk about the idea of a perfect victim, a white person in any scenario may never have to prove that they're perfect. Like,
Mm-hmm.
let's say
Yep.
if that black, instead of that schizophrenic person, if let's say that person wasn't black but rather white, I'm sure the situation, the circumstance, or the consequences of it might have been very different from him, for him and his family. The way
Mm-hmm.
people perceive him might have been very different. Like,
Yeah.
like when it's a black person who has schizophrenia, people are like, it's his fault. They tend to internalize his mental status. Whereby if it were to be a white person, it's more socially seen, whereby it's like a cause of external factors and not internalized to him. So I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that entire concept is racialized, and like I'm not sure if this is something which we can detach ourselves from, because
No.
I feel like these are expectations which are laid down, like whether it be as an international student coming abroad, let's say, there are these certain, it may not even be your parents who directly enforce these expectations, but these are indirect expectations which I think are just so ingrained because of the certain hierarchy that has been set in terms of race, whereby no white person in class ever has to prove themselves. Let's say even when they come to India, in fact they kind of stand out, and it's considered to be like, oh, now we have a white person in our class, like in
It builds
irres-
clout.
exactly, irrespective of their qualifications. But if the same, like a brown student is supposed to go in like a setting where they're surrounded by white people, it the limelight comes on them in the sense of expectations and being able to stand out and prove themselves worthy of being able to sit in a class and share a seat with so many other white students.
Mhm.
Like, and I face the question myself, like either it be the certain positive stereotypes also people have about brown people, whether they're very smart. I think those stereotypes also have a lot of burden to place
Simple.
on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.